What's good, with your boy It's Been a Reaction, and today TheOdd1sOut just posted a video. You know what I'm saying? We love animation, we love TheOdd1sOut page, so there's no point in wasting time. You know what I'm saying? Let's get to that. If you're not subbed, hit that sub and the like button. Here we go. This is TheOdd1sOut, every form of animation. Let's get to it.
Is alive.
This brick is alive. That
Not
brick?
convinced?
Nope.
Well, what if I did this?
I'm gonna do a backflip. That's gonna look so cool, Brickathy.
What are you boys doing?
Oh, whose asses are those?
For Grandma.
Oh! I'm impressed, but that brick's not alive. I'm impressed though. And you washing the asses away.
Are you
Now it's
convinced
Seinfeld.
now? Did the brick feel more alive? I mean, sure, it's still a brick that can't move on its own, but maybe because I put googly eyes on it and gave it a family, you can connect with this brick. And it made you feel emotions. Convincing you that something inanimate is animate is the main goal of the animate-or. They're nothing more than deranged frauds. For the last
putting us
century,
on game right now.
animators have innovated new techniques and styles to this medium, taking it from a spinning wheel that doesn't even use electricity to Spider-Verse. And today, I'm going to talk about all the processes and innovations that have brought the medium of animation to right now. But first, let's go all the way back to the beginning of film.
Back in black and white.
It was all black and white, and people had to put up text whenever they talked. Early on, filmmakers discovered
Why couldn't they get the sound though? Like what was stopping them from getting the sound? I wonder that.
a very simple trick to make anything appear alive in front of a camera. And that simple trick was called Stop
motion.
If you're filming something and then
Look at
stop
his
the
cheeks.
camera and then move the thing slightly, capture a new image, move the thing again, and continue to do that a tedious amount of times, on the film, that thing now magically looks like it can move on its own.
I had to do this in high school.
And with this technique, you could make literally anything appear to be moving.
Yeah.
Anything. But some filmmakers took this art form to an extreme level and created whole characters out of clay and a posable metal wire system called an armature. Now, animators can sculpt unique characters that bend and pose in much more believable ways. With stop motion, you don't need to hire a real dinosaur or giant monkey to make a movie about a dinosaur or giant monkey. I'm sorry you didn't get the job, Phil.
Damn.
You know, I just had a crazy idea. What if we made our entire puppet's head interchangeable? Now they can make any facial expression and mouth shape possible. We will have to sculpt out hundreds of different heads though, but I mean, come on, that'll be fun. That's why we're extreme, baby. Stop motion movies are still being made and enjoyed to this day. And while new technology does help make the overall process easier, animators are still using the same techniques that were used on King Kong back in the 1920s, where they carefully pose out a character's every movement frame by frame, in order. Stop motion is a medium that I can't even begin to understand how they do, let alone make it look good, you know? Having a stop motion character in gravity-defying poses, making hundreds of different faces, is done solely to make the character feel more alive. And sometimes, to help sell the realism, animators will mimic quirks that only happen in live-action films.
Like what?
I always chuckle when I see a lens flare in an animated movie, because, like, where did you come from? There's not even a camera lens. Unlike me, though, who's always got a camera rolling. Hey, how's it going? Uh-oh. Oh, no! Did you catch that? Did you see the motion blur? Look at this lizard eating a bug.
I don't know, I mean, that's it.
Oh, we got him. Now let's rewind the clip and pause right here. This lizard moves so fast that the camera can't even capture its movements correctly, and he transmogrifies into an amorphic blob that barely even resembles a lizard. But do not fret, dear viewer. This is called motion blur, and it's absolutely natural. Fast-moving objects are hard to see in real life anyway, so this blurry blob only showing up for one frame actually helps sell the idea that this little guy is moving quickly. If you watch any movie frame by frame, you'll find motion blur everywhere, and you won't even notice. So how do animators who are taking hundreds of still photos
you don't think about
handle
that like
this
certain people think
occurring
about
phenomenon with things in motion? Easy, they'll draw smear. animators draw their own
Smear
blurry
frames.
blob frame to mimic fast movements. Bodies can stretch, arms can multiply. Basically, we can sneak in nightmares as long as it's only shown for one frame. Smears, while being very fun to draw, can look very weird and goofy on their own. But in the context of the whole shot, you barely even notice they're there. Okay, maybe now you'll notice them, but that's only because I pointed them out. And since animators are bad boys and don't play by the rules, they can make smears out of anything. Even in stop motion, we can sculpt a physical smear frame like how they did in Leica's Paranorman, which, if you haven't seen, is going to be your new favorite movie. Smear frames can be used anytime,
I do remember Pain. We did see the Pain fight.
Unless you were an animator in the 1920s and 30s and you didn't know about them back then. In that case, you would have been animating something called
Rubber House?
In the 1920s and 30s, animators were still figuring out some core principles of animation.
It's bad.
Turns out there's 12 of them. Smear frames were used sparingly during this time, with animators usually only drawing characters with multiple limbs to show fast movements. The stretchy, wacky, and spiritually ascending smears that you all know and love weren't really used until the 1940s. Rubber hose characters have noodly, almost hose-like limbs that bend in all sorts of anatomically defying ways. Look at Mickey Mouse's noodle arms that I can now legally show you. The reason characters look like this is because drawing noodle arms and not worrying about anatomy is easier to draw. But like, just because something has noodle arms doesn't mean it's bad, you guys. What these animators were able to accomplish with the technology, if you could even call it that, is nothing short of dark magic. And the very same studio that made Steamboat Willie wanted to push the envelope and show the world that animation could be more. It doesn't just have to be noodly characters with Pac-Man eyes. They were going to animate a realistic woman with proportional arms that don't move in weird, exaggerated ways. And oh god, her noodle arms are moving in weird, exaggerated ways. In 1934, Disney released a short called The Goddess of Spring, being their first attempt at animating a character with what was supposed to have real human anatomy. They still had a lot to learn, obviously. Now, animating a quote-unquote anatomically correct human is actually a much harder task than you might realize. And that's because of the uncanny valley. As characters get more and more human characteristics, we hit an interesting point right here when something looks almost like a human, but is just a little off. Our pattern recognition brain starts setting off alarm bells and go, ugh, something is definitely wrong with that almost human. I am entering fight or flight right now. So if you're trying to make something look as close to a human as possible, but are just a tiny bit off, everything crumbles. The Goddess of Spring was still good practice for Disney because only 3 years later, they released the world's first fully animated feature film, Snow White. Can you really blame Disney for going 6 times over budget to make this movie? I mean, just look at how these human characters are moving. 10 years before Snow White, animated humans looked like this. So going from this to this
walking like that?
in only 10 years? How? I can't get over how real these human characters look sometimes. Almost too real.
Yeah,
well,
I'm thinking the same.
You're old enough to learn about the dangers of rotoscoping is the process of taking real-life footage and then manually tracing over every frame, resulting in an animation with unreal levels of realism. And I say unreal derogatorily. You're basically slapping a cartoon filter over live-action footage, but instead of simply slapping, you're spending multiple hours doing mindless and tedious drawing.
I don't know how y'all do that,
Rotoscoping is not the same as filming a human actor and then later referencing that footage, like what Disney did for Sleeping Beauty or Alice in Wonderland or any movie ever, because animators use references all the time. People had figured out how to rotoscope other people long before Snow White. So of course Disney, who was trying to convey real human movement, rotoscoped some shots. The problem with rotoscoping is that we start to sneak our way back to the bottom of the uncanny valley. Animated characters often do and should break the laws of physics.
Look at SpongeBob.
They can squash and stretch into weird proportions and be drawn in unique and interesting poses. And look, Snow White is still a masterpiece of a movie. The rotoscoping is fine, you barely notice it. It's good, it's a good movie, and it made Disney a lot of money. Also, how did Walt animate these shots of things reflecting in the water in 1937?
That's fire.
What, did they put special glass over paintings to make it look distorted or something? Who would be crazy enough to do that? If you made a whole movie entirely rotoscoped, what you end up with is Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings. Notice anything off about these characters'
feet?
movements?
Oh my gosh.
Look at how Gandalf moved just a year ago in The Hobbit. Now, Lord of the Rings, Hobbit,
he's tweaking.
Lord of the Rings. Almost every shot in this movie was rotoscoped, and the shots that weren't used live action footage with a filter over it. I'm not saying that rotoscoping is bad. You just have to use it correctly. A character switching from traditionally animated to rotoscoped is incredibly funny, and always will be. The YouTuber Joel Javier makes very entertaining rotoscope skits that feel like a fever dream, and I mean that underogatorily. And a lot of music videos get away with rotoscoping because, admittedly, rotoscoping is a very cool visual. Now, I wish I could say the first Lord of the Rings movie was a hidden animation gem, but I don't know, it's not on my top 10, I'm sorry. It probably made a lot of nerds in the 70s happy, but thankfully The Lord of the Rings has been adapted into many other forms of media, like video games, Magic the Gathering cards, and anime. Anime?
I was watching that. I gotta watch that again.
Making a Lord of the Rings anime. You thought Hollywood, California was the only place in the world making moving pictures? Japan's been making their own moving pictures too, and some of them are moving drawings. There are entire college courses on the history of anime.
Wow.
But you're not paying me tuition, so we're gonna have to skip over a couple things. A lot of early anime is now lost media because cinemas didn't preserve film back then, and an earthquake destroyed many studios in 1923. Some Japanese animators created shorts out of paper cutouts because buying thousands of celluloid sheets was too expensive, and they had some very unique character designs. And some Japanese animators took inspiration from Disney and made shorts that looked very similar to America's rubber hose characters. Then by the 1940s, some major world events happened that got most of the world involved, and both American and Japanese animation studios were affected. But after all that, in 1948, one studio called Japan Animated Films, later bought out by Toei Animation, set out to be the Disney of the East. And they made cartoons about magical schoolgirls, and are still in business to this day and made some other less popular shows.
Digimon.
One animator who quit working at Toei created his own company and made an anime based off his comic about a robot boy. Hey, I kind of like that art style of drawing humans with big expressive eyes. Let's do more of that. That same year, another studio made an anime about humans controlling giant robots. I wonder if that's going to inspire a whole new genre. And this guy was commissioned by American studios to make stop-motion Christmas movies like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Yo, we watch that in school all the time.
Rudolph is anime. By the 1960s, Japanese shows started airing on televisions all across the globe, and they continued to make unique and interesting stories with amazing animations that were beloved by billions of people and grew into extremely profitable franchises.
Anime great, bro.
Like, I'm talking the most profitable franchise. By the 1970s, Disney was still very much the animated movie gold standard, making big-budgeted movies with family-friendly values, which is
Disney wasn't
fine
his bag.
to do.
Disney wasn't
Kids
his bag.
love bright colors and talking animals that only cartoons can offer. But some studios realized that animation was a medium, not a genre, and made animated movies exclusively for adults. That's part of the reason why the first Lord of the Rings movie was entirely rotoscoped. It wasn't trying to be cartoony and over the top. It was trying to be real and gritty. Animation could be anything for anyone of any age. But really, if you think about it, there hadn't been a new way of showing people moving drawings since those very early days of black and white stop motion. In stop motion, you take a picture, move a figure, take a picture, move a figure. In cell animation, you take a picture, move a cell, take a picture, move a cell. Everything's just been a series of pictures moved manually in front of a camera this whole time? Always has been.
You've got mail.
Oh. It says the entire animation and film industry is about to be flipped onto its head forever and ever.
Why?
Yeah, right. I'm sure this whole computer thing is just a fake. With the ever-increasing advancements of technology, we were able to achieve increasingly advanced achievements, like putting a guy on the moon.
Crazy.
And drawing silly little cartoons more efficiently. Gone are the days of having to physically draw everything out on paper and underpay a team of hundreds of pretty girls to hand paint every frame. Now we can use this fancy new computer to render everything out for us. All we have to do is create a real-life mold of our real-life human hand, then draw 350 triangles onto that hand, then manually measure out the X, Y, and Z coordinates of 800 different data points.
Worse. That
no,
sounds
come on,
worse.
this is gonna be so much faster. Put that pencil down. Now we just program in a couple of keyframes and we get... Huh.
Yeah.
We still don't have the processing power to render everything out.
Not that good, huh?
Oh, I know. We'll just point this
That
long
sound.
exposure camera at the
Polaroid.
computer screen. Get these art supplies out of here. This is the future. And when everything's finished rendering...
In 3 years?
We'll get this. A whole human hand moving on its own without having to draw a single frame.
That's progress.
This process is exactly what Utah University student Ed Catmull did in 1972. And while it might not have been more efficient than drawing everything out by hand, it showed that computers were capable of rendering out three-dimensional animations. This was made after we landed a man on the moon,
That's
by the way, so
kinda
don't
backward,
tell
you
me
ask
this
me.
was CGI. As the computer's processing power grew exponentially, more and more filmmakers started seeing the benefits of using computer-generated images in movies.
That looks horrible.
A decade after Catmull digitized his hand, films like Tron showcased characters racing on mind-boggling computer-generated light cycles. This might look... you know, bad by today's standards.
Bad at the time.
But these graphics were something that audiences had never seen before.
I respect
Plus,
it.
the movie takes place inside of a computer, so this is probably what people thought the insides of a computer looked like anyways. At the time, computers did a great job at creating rigid geometric shapes, and animators used that to their advantage. Characters would still have to be animated traditionally on cells, but objects that weren't going to change shape like black cauldrons, could now magically fly in circles around our characters.
That's cool seeing the progress they made.
Computer's rendering power during the climax of The Great Mouse Detective, when these two rodents fought each other inside a clock tower and all the spinning gears were generated by a computer.
I don't remember this movie.
Animators can now make any complex shape move in a three-dimensional space without having to draw a single frame. I mean, you know, except for the characters, they still very much had to draw those. Computer graphics were here to stay, as Disney integrated more of them into movies, like these cars in Oliver and Company, or Eric's ship in The Little Mermaid, and then they stopped using cells entirely. Starting with The Rescuers Down Under, Disney no longer used cells and made movies entirely digitally with a program called CAPS. So if you ever wanted to own a cell of Joanna the Lizard eating an egg, that's too bad because they don't exist. Which fucking sucks because Joanna was the best goddamn lizard Disney ever made. Don't touch me! TV shows and anime still use cells till about the year 2000-ish, but eventually everyone switched to digital. Now to color a frame, all you had to do was... So computers were great at making rigid, non-flexible shapes, but has anyone ever tried to make a computer...
What was that?
A group of computer scientists who were working
man?
for a small indie director named George Lucas were taking this art form to an extreme level and created whole characters completely generated by a computer. Then a small entrepreneur named Steve Jobs hired those computer scientists and made his own company, Pixar. Yes, Steve Jobs was one of the founders of Pixar, and he originally created the company to sell a high-end computer powerful enough to render 3D animations. But no one bought the computer because it cost $135,000.
Oh my God,
So the team
Steve.
scrapped the computer selling idea and just stuck with making computer-generated cartoons. But they soon discovered a unique problem. The computer had a hard time getting textures right, and everything, including babies, ended up looking like it was made out of plastic. So the team's clever workaround this dilemma was to make a movie with the entire cast of characters actually made out of plastic. Or ants. You know, people don't know what ants are supposed to look like. It's fine. Pixar continued to develop new processes to get the computer to generate unique textures and lighting, like simulating human hair or fur, or lighting things in such a way to make everything appear underwater. No other studio was pioneering computer-generated images like Pixar was. And then in 2006, Disney bought Pixar. But I don't think Steve was too upset because 1 year later, he achieved his dream of selling a high-end computer. This time being a little more affordable.
Yeah.
A little. Now, I want to squash any misconception that computers do all the
Steve Jobs getting to the bag.
Animators still have to manually pose a character's body and facial expression off of a character's render. Animators will build a complex system of nodes and bones that let them manually pose a character into any position possible.
Monster
It's
Inc.
kind of like a digital stop-motion puppet, or an actual puppet without any of the strings. All CG characters are just their own complicated version of Pinocchio. Using character rigs is really the only way of animating things in 3 dimensions. But it's not like we can use rigs in 2D animation. Here in the 2nd dimension, we don't have a fancy Z-axis. 2D animation can only be done by hand drawing 24 new images every second. Except we don't. I lied. Even all the way back when characters were animated with paper and cells, animators wouldn't draw a whole new frame every frame. Usually, they would animate pieces of a character and paint each piece on its own cell. You remember Robin? They only drew 1 body and 5 different heads. But because cells are a physical object that get harder to handle the more you have, animators could only break a character up into 2 or 3 different pieces. But now, thanks to the computer, we can break up a character into as many pieces as we'd like 4, or 5, or 173. Have you ever played around with the free and revolutionary animation software Pivot Stick Figure Animator? If you're the type of person that says, "Oh, I suck at drawing. I can't even draw stick figures," then you're gonna love this.
That's actually great.
On Pivot, you're given a pre-made stick figure or horse that have these joints that can be posed however you like. Each of these stick figures' limbs are just individual pieces that are connected in such a way that make it look like a stick figure. So to make these animations, we're not really drawing anything, we're just manually posing out a character like a digital puppeteer. I wasn't saying you can make a rig out of 173 pieces just to be funny, because that's how many pieces I'm made out of. That's right, me, even I'm a rig. And can I tell you a secret? Most TV shows use rigs too. Of course, hand-drawn traditional animation is still used to make these shows. It's not a lost art form or anything. But rigs are super useful at making still pretty high-quality levels of animation, but at a much cheaper cost. And as we all know, TV animation has to create more animation per budget. But maybe rig animation still isn't as cost-effective as you'd like. And maybe you're not a fan of the complicated puppet look and you want something that looks more human. Well, there's one more animation process we can try called motion.
Motion cap. See, this one I know.
If we put an actor inside one of these dorky ping-pong suits, a computer can pinpoint and record that actor's exact movements. Now we can take those movements, slap a cartoon character's model over it, and we get an animation that looks like shit. Motion capture is the rotoscoping of 3D animation. It cuts costs, but the results are too human, and we're back at the bottom of the uncanny valley. That's why the kids from the Polar Express look so nightmarish, because they are following the exact movements of Tom Hanks. Yes, Tom Hanks, the adult man, did some motion capture for the small, nameless hero boy from the Polar Express. There's probably a reason we haven't made a fully motion capture cartoon in over 10 years. Because it looks weird. But I mean, that didn't stop one of these movies from winning an Oscar.
Monster House was fire.
In animation. And before you ask, no, it wasn't Monster House or Tintin. It was Mars Needs Moms. Duh. Just like rotoscoping, motion capture can be used correctly.
Avatar.
Computer-generated characters acting side-by-side real human actors look decent. It's not that jarring that these creatures who exist in a live-action world are moving just like live-action people. And let's not forget all the VTubers who use motion capture technology to bring their jiggly assets to life. No matter what method someone uses to try and convince you that something else is alive, I think is incredibly cool. And I hope you think it's cool too. But maybe you don't think it's cool, and you don't care about animation, and you just put this video on in the background while you were cleaning. That's totally fine. I do that all the time. I just like learning about how all my favorite animated pieces of media get created, because it's not always the same process. And I think it's great that new technology is allowing anyone to express themselves in whatever way possible. A person expressing themselves. Those are the 3 key words here. From the big studios that are just now pioneering new and interesting styles with digital animation, to the indie studios that have access to incredible technology, which allow anyone working from their bedrooms in their pajamas to create some truly masterpieces of animation. So, if you're the type of person that likes to trick people into thinking that something is alive, then you deserve all the respect in the world. In fact, here are some cool people that made the animation in this video possible.
That was a dead rat.
You just made it to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm still trying to figure out this VTuber model, so I'm over-enunciating my words. The technology behind this is beyond my comprehension.
That's hilarious.
If you're still deciding what to get for the holidays, then great news. We have mystery boxes over on my website, so you can leave the deciding up to us.
Oh,
now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go take a nap.
Yo, that is hilarious, bro.
Are you still watching?
Yeah. Go sub the TheOdd1sOut page immediately, bro. That was really cool. I'm not like a big drawer or like that. I never really into that stuff. Well, I would like drawing. I just always suck. But it's cool seeing that process, bro. I love animations, and I always be like, dang. Like, I always wonder what really goes into it. And seeing this, that's, y'all have all the props in the world. Cause I know it takes hours, on days, on weeks, even on years sometimes to do some simple thing they be doing. And to have that patience to really do that, y'all some goats, man. And hey, we love the product. Keep doing the animations. We love it. Shout out to TheOdd1sOut for this. If you're not subbed to my page, that sub button, the like button. Let me know what y'all think on the channel. It's your boy TK.